Okay, welcome everyone. This is the LiDAR Special Interest Track, Part 1. There are 2 today. This is brought to you by the AGIC LiDAR Workgroup, which Jenna and I are the co-chairs for. If you are interested in LiDAR and it's your thing, or you just want to come find out what's going on, I strongly encourage you to contact us and get on our email lists and start coming to the meetings. We try to do some informative stuff, but it also keeps you up to date with what's happening in LiDAR around the state when opportunities arise to partner or just at least knowing the deadlines of 3DEP and other things like that. So please come and join us. It's a lot of fun. So we have 2 tracks today. Let me just jump quickly to the second one here. That's happening at 3:30 to 4:30 today. That's the LiDAR Special Interest Group Part 2. And you'll see that it's all from NAU, Dr. Andrew Sanchez-Metter, and Taylor and John as well. And they're doing some more sort of the cutting edge LiDAR stuff from the university perspective. And a lot of theirs is sort of ground-based LiDAR, which I think is really interesting. But that's not what's happening here right now. Today, we have an all-star panel. So we have first up Chris Crosby. Chris Crosby is the founder and principal investigator of OpenTopography project. Chris also manages the Geodetic Imaging Program, terrestrial laser scanning, TLS, photogrammetry, and synthetic aperture radar, SAR, at, oh man, Chris, you threw some tough acronyms here. You have to pronounce it, UNAVCO at Boulder, Colorado. Trained as a geologist, including graduate work at ASU, Chris has been working on the management, distribution, and processing and applications of LiDAR for nearly 20 years. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. Let me throw you control so you can show us stuff.
Thanks, Mark. Let's see, share Microsoft PowerPoint. Let's see, can we all see this as a full presentation?
Yeah, you're looking good.
Yep. Okay, cool. And you're seeing my main screen because I got 2 monitors, so sometimes things get confused. Great. Yeah, so my name's Chris Crosby. I am a project manager at UNAVCO, which is that funny acronym, which is a National Science Foundation funded facility based in Boulder, Colorado. But I'm going to talk about another project that I'm also involved in called OpenTopography, which some of you may be familiar with. There were a couple of OpenTopography presentations last year at the AGIC meeting in person. It's nice to talk to AGIC because despite the fact I live in Colorado, I did live in Arizona for quite a few years when I was a grad student at Arizona State. And a lot of the early work that went on with OpenTopography was really a lot of prototyping and proof of concept happened while I was at ASU. And so this project has a heart in Arizona and still strong collaborations with Ramon Aerosmith's research group at Arizona State University. Oops. The next slide. So a quick overview of OpenTopography before I dive into the core topic, which is to talk a little bit about USGS 3DEP LiDAR point cloud data and some recent work we've done to put those data sets into OpenTopography. So OpenTopography has this core mission, which is to democratize access to LiDAR topography data. And this is something that we started back in the late 2000s, thinking about, as LiDAR was a relatively new technology, how do you make the data widely accessible to a whole variety of different kinds of users with various levels of geospatial kind of data and software and analysis expertise? And so the fundamental principle is that you co-locate the access to the data set itself with computational tools that allow users to derive more usable products. So that's basically starting with a raw point cloud on a server someplace and allowing people to work through a workflow that runs on our computational resources to produce derivative products. So that would be things like DTMs, DSMs, visualizations, hydrologic networks, etc. OpenTopography started with a very strict focus on airborne LiDAR, but as technology has evolved, we're now doing a fair amount of work with photogrammetric data sets, both from drones, but also from space-based platforms. And then also we have access to things like the classic kind of topographic data sets like SRTM that come from various space-based platforms. So quickly, who are we? So OpenTopography is a very small team. It was founded in 2009, but as I said, a lot of the fundamental technology and proof of concept goes back to the mid-2000s. And really the fundamental thing is it's a collaboration between geoscientists and kind of geospatial data folks and a core team of computer scientists at the San Diego Supercomputer Center at UCSD. And so we're really leveraging a lot of compute resources and that kind of expertise in how you build systems to manage big data. Another important point that I'll reiterate later when I talk more about 3DEP is we're supported by the Earth Sciences Directorate at the National Science Foundation. So our fundamental focus and the reason that we receive funding from the NSF is to support geoscientists doing research. And that becomes important when you start talking about distribution of very large geospatial data sets to a broader community. So what do we do? Our fundamental activity is basically distribution of various topographic data products. So that's point clouds, raster products, and other derivative products. I'm going to talk about 3DEP data access today, but that's something that's relatively new within the last, say, 7 months or so. And we have a long history of doing education and training and use of these technologies. So we've run something like 32 short courses with various partners to train people on how to use and analyze and basically become more familiar with LiDAR data as a resource. Our primary funder is the National Science Foundation, but we've actually grown partnerships with lots of different state, local, and international entities. So for example, I'll show you some work we're doing with Land Information New Zealand, which is the national mapping agency in New Zealand, to distribute all of their nationwide LiDAR data through OpenTopography. Fundamentally, as I said in the beginning, OpenTopography is about providing data to users at sort of the level at which they want to receive it. So as opposed to shipping somebody a hard drive with a bunch of LiDAR point cloud files on it, or having them download point cloud files on a tile by tile basis, for example, and having somebody figure out what to do with an LAS or LAZ file, OpenTopography provides access to that raw data, but then also a suite of tools to derive products that are more easily integrated into a GIS, visualized in a web browser, or just downloaded, like printed and downloaded as a paper map to take into the field, for that matter. And so we have the system begins with an area of interest query. Basically, select your area of interest on a map, and then parameterize the workflow, like what are the derivative products you want, what file formats do you want, and then it will run. We have a growing suite of web services as well, both sort of RESTful APIs as well as OGC web services to access this same data, and this is a sort of ongoing work in progress. So this is what OpenTopography's data catalog looks like today. Anything in red here is a data set that we're hosting on servers at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. It's something like 341 data sets, 266,000 square kilometers, 1.6 trillion individual LiDAR bounces. And these data have been largely funded through National Science Foundation for various academic research projects related to geoscience, but also through some partnerships. So you see we have the whole state of Indiana, and that was the state of Indiana approached us and asked if they could use our platform to deliver their data. I showed New Zealand there because New Zealand is in the process of a 5-year program to map the whole country with LiDAR. This looks a lot like the USGS 3DEP program, and they've elected to use OpenTopography as their distribution platform, and they're funding us to do so. And so we're releasing a couple of New Zealand data sets a month at this point. But the thing that you'll notice is the map is pretty sparse. And so one of the common requests we get from people up until recently was, this is great, but like you don't have data over my house or over my area of interest. And so we know that USGS has been collecting this vast data set called 3DEP, right? And the 3DEP data cover about 65% of the United States right now. But they're kind of hard to get at because they require access via various USGS pathways, and they were certainly hard for OpenTopography to integrate. That all changed in about February of 2019 when the USGS, in partnership with Amazon Web Services and a guy named Howard Butler, who is an open source software developer, migrated the whole point cloud data into a pair of Amazon buckets. And one of those is what Amazon calls a public data set, which means it's free to access, it's free to egress data out of. And the data are sitting in there in this entwined point tile format, which is a very powerful way to sort of stream data across the web but also not particularly easy for the average user to utilize. And so what we've done, what we did was when this became available, is we basically leveraged the fact that these data were now sitting in a publicly accessible, homogeneous, easy to access way, and then basically figured out how to pipe that data through OpenTopography's existing distribution pathways. So this is applying our processing tools to the data sitting in AWS. And the goal here is to really increase the impact and the investment in that data set. So as I said, it's 65% of the United States, the green polygons in that image. And it's 20.5 trillion LiDAR points at the moment. And it's, depending on how you calculate the value or the cost of a LiDAR data collection on a per square mile basis, it's something like $300 or $500 million in investment to collect these data between state, local, and federal partners. And so the goal here is really, how do you increase the impact in that investment of data? How do you make the data easy to use so people will apply it to various kinds of problems? And so what I'm going to quickly show you is a little cartoon of how this works in practice. This is live and on the internet, but I'll talk about some restrictions presently in a second. But the way OpenTopography works, for those of you who used it in the past, you basically navigate through a fine data map, make a selection that's your area of interest. We allow you to do things like select the subset of the point cloud that you'd like to work with. So say you want to work with just ground only points, you can make that selection here. And then we also do projection on the fly. So you can basically choose the coordinate system you want the data to come out in. And you're doing all this through a web browser. You're interacting with computers at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. And so what we've done is we've now pointed those services to this Amazon S3 bucket. This is, again, a public data set that the USGS is maintaining and publishing data into. It's this entwine point tiles format. And we basically call this bucket, we extract the data, we transform the data, we bring it back to San Diego. And we're able to do this actually relatively efficiently across the network, because it turns out that the San Diego Supercomputer Center has a dark fiber connection to the Amazon Web Service network. And that's pretty powerful, because it means that we're sort of on an optimized network connection. We're not going across standard internet. And that makes this go relatively quickly. It's still slower than as if the data were stored at San Diego, but it's still not terrible. And then when this is done, the data come back as either LAS or LAZ point cloud tiles for that subset of the data, dynamically created digital elevation models, either using a triangulation or a local gridding algorithm, export in like kind of your favorite geospatial raster format, GeoTIFF, IMG, prefer to bring into your software. And then we produce a bunch of visualizations. So, it's like hillshades over Google Maps or Google Earth, point cloud visualization in the browser, which is what this little video is. It's me just playing with a piece of, this is Prescott, Arizona, Whiskey Row, downtown Arizona in the browser. So this is cool because you're making a selection on top of 3D data through a web portal. We go pull that data out of a bucket that's sitting in Oregon. And then that data comes back to San Diego, is computed and derived products, and then you can visualize in a web browser. So you never leave the browser as an end user. Other things we're working on that are already inside of OpenTopography are hydrologic analysis. So we do flow routing. So we're using a tool called 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐸m, but it works a lot like ArcHydro. And then the other thing that if you were around on Monday at the AGIC meeting, you may have seen Chelsea Scott give a very nice hour-long demonstration of topographic differencing and change detection tools that are built into OpenTopography. And so the goal is to pipe 3D data through these tools, and that's still a work in progress. We haven't done that yet. The data access is built, but these higher level kind of processing tools are still coming. So this is the status looking at Arizona, since this is the AGIC meeting. There are 20 data sets currently about covering the state of Arizona. There are a few new ones coming that we're going to be releasing shortly that are along the Arizona-New Mexico border. But my calculations, it's about 14% of the state of Arizona covered by 3DEP. And then as I understand it, there are 6 or so data sets that are either planned or proposed in the pipeline through the BAA process. That's just the state of Arizona. Stepping back and looking at 3DEP in OpenTopography, this is where the subtlety is. So at the moment, this is only available to US academic users. So we've restricted access in this initial trial to our what we consider to be NSF's core community. So these are academic users of OpenTopography. This is the group that is in theory downloading data for research and education. And so far, 758 users have signed up to use these data in the last 7 months, and they've run about 2,200 jobs so far. And so you might say, well, that's cool, but like, why didn't you just let the world go at 20 trillion points? Just turn the whole thing on overnight. And we know that from experience with dealing with these larger statewide data sets, things like Indiana's 2011, 2013 data set, that large data sets tend to drive large demand. And we were concerned that we're not resourced well enough to sustain on-demand computation across the whole 65% of the United States. The number of new users that become interested in topography suddenly become quite a bit larger. And frankly, the National Science Foundation is probably, as we've been told, not particularly enthusiastic about spending their resources, which are meant to facilitate geoscience research, to widely distribute these kinds of data. And so the update here for everybody is that we're currently in negotiations with NSF about how much of this offering to open up publicly. I actually have a call tomorrow with the National Science Foundation to talk about this very topic. But the take home is that our intent at this point is to offer non-academic users access to 3D data through OpenTopography, kind of in a freemium business model. So this may be that you're able to run a certain number of jobs or process a certain amount of spatial coverage per month for free. And if you want to access more than that, there'll be either a fee to the user. The other interesting model here that would be interesting to talk with this folks who represent state agencies would be some kind of partnership with agencies within a specific state who might want to unlock this type of data access for their community, for their broader stakeholders, through kind of a nominal yearly cost through OpenTopography. So this could be a single agency, it could be a consortium of agencies. We have spoken to the USGS about this, and the USGS is not interested at this point in sponsoring that activity. So that's my time, but this was the update, and stay tuned. We do hope to roll this out more broadly to everybody, but it's a really nice and exciting way to offer access to these data sets. So if you're interested in learning more about OpenTopography, we encourage you to check us out on various social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You're welcome to email me directly if you want to chat about this or anything else related to topography. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was really cool. Like it's just
stop sharing.
EDU. You think they would have thrown in .gov for email addresses too?
Yeah, the .gov thing is an interesting question. That's one of the topics to talk about with NSF is where do they want to draw the boundary between who they're willing to support access to and who they're not.
Yeah. I think we have at least a minute or two if anybody happens to have a quick question for Chris. Feel free to throw it in the chat. Okay. Well, we'll also have some time at the end if people think of questions then. But Chris, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Darin, you should have just gotten control. Darin's presentation on remote sensing the landscape survey. Darin graduated from the University of Arizona with a BS in environmental science with a focus in geographic information systems. Darin works for the City of Phoenix Water Services Department for over 16 years as a GIS technician, senior GIS technician, and currently as a quantitative analyst. He has been dabbling in remote sensing and LiDAR inside the software of 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐧𝐚 for the last 4 years as time permits with his job. He's married and has 4 kids, so he has no free time, but I guess he's scraped out a little bit to do something. He enjoys GIS, geography, earth science, math, nature documentaries, sports that involve throwing something, sharks, and good humor. However, he recognizes that cats are the devil's spawn, and he also hates public speaking. So, Darin, you out there? I added the little thing about the cats, though. I'm allergic to cats, so they don't hate me. Darin, we can't hear you yet, or at least I can't.
There we go. How's that?
Ah, there we go. Okay. Darin, take it away.
All right, thanks. Hi, everybody. I guess it's not true that cats are not the devil's spawn. I happen to own two, but sometimes I'm very grumpy with them. But it's definitely true about public speaking, not my favorite thing. I appreciate that Mark called us this all-star panel coming up to present to you today, and that Chris mentioned that there's a wide-ranging variety of experience with LiDAR. You're going to find out today that on this particular panel, I'm the rookie of the group, and my experience is going to be very, very low. So let's see what we're going to see what an average Joe city employee can show you with LiDAR. This presentation is going to be kind of like a LiDAR in action. What has a local organization done actually using LiDAR in their work and the aspects of what they're trying to accomplish. I hope you find it interesting. It's been a lot of fun for us at the City of Phoenix working on it. And we're going to start it by telling a tale of landscape classification through remote sensing. So in Phoenix, let's see here. So in Phoenix, the majority of annual water demand is used outdoors. For projecting future water demand, understanding outdoor water trends is vital. Which areas of Phoenix have more outdoor water use than others? How do newer homes water use compare to older homes water use? Are older homes transitioning to lower water use landscapes, and if so, at what rate? And how does water use relate to a home or parcel or property size? Planners and Water Services created a landscape classification system, which is determined first by how much grass a parcel contains, and second, how much overall vegetation that parcel contains. The 5 general categories are turf, extensive, moderate, sparse, and arid. And then we take these classifications and we try to relate them back to water use. In 2019, the City of Phoenix, the City of Glendale, and the Town of Gilbert completed a joint effort called the Multi-City Water Use Study on the Single-Family Residential Sector. This required each municipality to randomly select over 1,000 single-family homes. They needed to measure the parcel area. They needed to verify the area of the home to the assessor data, measure hardscapes such as the driveway. They needed to know how much grass was on the parcel, the surface of the surface area of the pool, and they also measured all of the area that wasn't covered in hardscape, and also not vegetation, but could be in the future. All of these measurements were used to find a parcel to a particular landscape classification. And this was all accomplished by a human user on a desktop computer using the ArcMap measure tool. It was labor and time intensive. So when the landscape coding was completed and the water use data was joined, the analysis began, and the results were pretty exciting. So the goal of the study was to see how much the municipalities' water demand differed from one another. And it turned out that, at least with respect to these 3 municipalities, across the board, the 5 different landscape categories closely trended to one another. So it might be interpolated that these patterns exist in the other cities in the valley. These and other data obtained were great for overall city use, but leadership had further questions. So more questions arose about smaller areas inside the city boundaries. City leaders wanted to know more about water use in specific zip codes. They started asking about specific villages, council districts, pressure zones, and more. So while the random data sets we used for the original study were statistically good for the city as a whole, they weren't large enough to provide meaningful distribution statistics for greater disaggregations or smaller areas. If we want statistical confidence with this kind of disaggregation, we were going to need a lot more parcel classification. And we needed to find a way to collect that increase of data accurately in a timely fashion. So the manual method just wasn't going to cut it. So we started down a new path, acquiring new types of data and software. We began using 4-band spectral data from the National Agricultural Imagery Program, or NAIP, and we started using this inside a remote sensing software produced by Trimble called 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐶ognition. With the near-infrared band and the 4-band data, we, of course, were easily able to separate vegetation from non-vegetation, But for our purposes, it was imperative that we separate grass from all other vegetation. Grass is the #1 outdoor consumer of water, and it needs to be accurately accounted for. So with 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐸, which has a deep well of map algebra and even other tools to measure different values that already exist inside the foreband, we were able to separate out grass somewhat from vegetation. What we did is we took hundreds and hundreds of samples from one NAEP data set, and we would bring them into Excel, which we knew that these samples were either grass or trees because we had visually confirmed it for ourselves. Once we got that into Excel, we would look for some kind of algebraic relationship between these points and in their values to separate them into point clouds. In this case, on this graph you see here, there is a value called homogeneity that exists inside 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐸 where it can actually measure the smoothness of a pixel, of a raster pixel. The more smooth it is, the more tree-like it is, the more rough it was, the more grass-like it was. And also, it was comparing this, contrasting this to the red band being multiplied by the blue band, which separated, in this example here, trees from grass fairly decently. The really cool thing about this is we were able to actually draw a line in Excel between the 2 point clouds to try to separate them. And when we got the equation for that line, 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐸 is sophisticated enough that it can actually take that equation and use it to derive and separate all grass from trees. That kind of worked. You see, in some NAEP data sets, it worked, but in others, it didn't. The method proved to be just too sensitive to times of day, to the capture angle of the camera underneath the plane as it flew, or even weather. We could never use the same equation between data sets. You would need to find a new algebraic relationship with each NAEP data set, and then to find the new line of separation. So this was still labor and time intensive, and it just wasn't separating the grass at a satisfactory level. So at length, we determined that we needed LiDAR, and that LiDAR would answer our problem simply and effectively by simply measuring the height of vegetation. However, at the time that we were working on this, we didn't have the budget fund sufficiently large enough to cover the cost for a LiDAR data set the size of Phoenix, Arizona. Sometime later, I attended a city GIS user group meeting and I listened to a presentation by Matthew Toro about USGS LiDAR dataset they had received from USGS covering a large portion of Phoenix, and that they had put it up on the ASU Map and Geospatial Hub and posted it for the public. It was like manna from heaven for us. The LiDAR didn't fully cover all of Phoenix. It went up just about as far north as Loop 101. But even though it wasn't entirely encompassing the city, it captured more than 85% of our customers. So we coined the phrase, a lot of LiDAR data is better than no LiDAR data. And we began to download it so that we could use it. We determined that the LiDAR data that was collected by USGS was collected sometime in the fall of 2014. And we had NAEP data from June 2015, making at most a 9-month differential between the two data sets. And we felt that that was still close enough that they would relate well enough that we could use them. So we spent several weeks carefully downloading all of the raw LiDAR data and converting it to normalized digital surface models. And then we had our first LiDAR set as a city. This 3D image of downtown Phoenix and the presentation's background are both derived from this data set. We brought the LiDAR data into 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐸. We rewrote the rule sets and to use the new data, and then after a lot of testing, we set out to classify as much landscape as time would permit us between our other assignments. And so now I'm going to show you what that looks like. So first we start out 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐸. You load up the rule sets over here in this window. 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐸 has a rule set system that vaguely resembles object-oriented programming. Each process has a preset algorithm behind it. These processes can be organized into a process tree with different branches, and we've broken our process tree into 6 main branches, with the first one being reset. We learned quickly it's helpful to have a process that's either reset or undo classifications as you test different iterations. We also have a testing portion down at the bottom. This sort of acts like a development area before you move a new classification process into the regular classification portion of the rule set. The remaining branches are segmentation and pre-classification, classification, assessment, and export. And we're going to go over each one of these somewhat. So after the loading the rule set, we load in the LiDAR data. And as you can see here, this is a part of downtown Phoenix, somewhat north of let's see, that is north of Sky Harbor slightly. This is an NDSM, so the brighter the pixels in the screen, the higher or taller the object is. Once we have the LiDAR in, we bring in the 4-band data. We prefer to keep the 4-band data showing where the NIR is highly reflective in the red band. So, because when you're creating a rule set and you're going through many different iterations, and being that vegetation is our target surface type, we want to identify it easily. After that, we bring in a parcel shapefile. I know, I said shapefile. Shapefile is an old, archaic GIS file type, and unfortunately, it's the only file type that can go between 𝐸cognition and any form of GIS. So we're just grateful to have it. The parcel, as it comes in, it's referred to as a vector layer in 𝐸cognition terms. You find out when you're learning 𝐸cognition and you're going back and forth between GIS and 𝐸cognition, it's kind of like someone who's learning Spanish and Portuguese. They sound alike, but you can't quite make a connection between the two. So with this vector layer is very important because it's used specifically in the segmentation portion and also in the export portion of this process. Once you have all of these data sets in, you can begin the segmentation process. And what we start with is with a preliminary segmentation called chessboard. Segmentation measures the spectral values of each cell and begins to aggregate them together according to the level of similarity set by the user. So, and when it collects them together, we call these image objects. Image objects are what we would call features in GIS. Chessboard normally creates different size squares of the screen, but it has a function that turns it into a secret weapon for us GIS users. Chessboard segmentation can be forced to use the vector layer boundaries. And if a user dictates a user can dictate the minimum size that an image object can be. So if a user chooses an absurdly large size, like 1 trillion square feet, but also turns on the setting that the vector layer boundaries must be used, the resulting image objects become an exact duplicate of the vector layer, and now they exist in 𝐸cognition as 𝐸cognition objects. This allows the 𝐸cognition user to then pre-classify these image objects as parcels inside 𝐸cognition, and anything outside these parcels becomes one large unclassified blob. 𝐸cognition can kind of, quote, be programmed to only process algorithms inside a specific classification. This allows a user to confine all future processes to be within the parcels they load. So therefore, if a user wants to focus on schools or parks or just single-family homes, they can do so by just bringing in those parcels. This cuts down on processing time, data management, and storage. It's one of my favorite capabilities of 𝐸cognition. So now that we've got these parcel image objects, we're going to this area right here. So these image objects have been classified as parcels, and the remaining rules are set up to operate only inside these objects. So next we use multi-resolution segmentation, which breaks down the individual parcels to as small pieces as we can. We want to identify each individual pixel for exactly what it represents in the real world, and then later we'll aggregate them together for like neighbors. Once this is done, we begin to locate and classify different surface types. Near infrared is most reflected by vegetation, generally speaking, but it's also absorbed the most by water. So therefore, these two surfaces are the easiest to identify first. And through our experience, it's easiest to start with water. So the first thing we do is we use our classification rules to identify pools in this area. Next, we separate the vegetation from the non-vegetation. And the vegetation here is highlighted in yellow. Remember, at this point, it's where we did actually used to use the 4-band to try to separate trees and grass from each other. But now, with LiDAR, it's as simple as what is tall and what is short. So currently, we have here that anything that's over 2 meters tall, please turn it into trees. And anything that's below half a meter, turn to grass. And anything that's caught in between those two heights, we lovingly refer to as shrubs. So these height values are up to the discretion of the user, and they can be adjusted as necessary and are far easier than trying to find algebraic relationships over and over and over again. So finally, we identify and classify the remaining non-vegetation objects. And we also run a final cleanup process to try and curve out some of these small indiscretions that do take place. Then 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 has a really cool capability of showing a side-by-side view that allows the user to view the original raster on one side and the newly classified layer on the other, as you can see here. A user can pan over large areas and make a determination if they're satisfied with the classification, or if more refinement is required, they reset all the classifications and run a new iteration. This whole process for one NAEP dataset took approximately 20 to 25 minutes. So next is about exporting. How do you export this data out? Well, in exporting, the original vector layers become kind of like containers to hold the classifications as they come back out. In this case, they come out as percentages. So you find out each parcel has a specific percentage of grass, trees, shrubs, building, ground, pool, and all the other surfaces that we identify, and they are attached as attributes to that parcel. The image objects themselves can also be saved as a shapefile, as you see in the background, but a word of warning and caution, I tried this once, and it turns out there's hundreds of thousands of those objects, which create hundreds of thousands of features in a single shapefile, and that can become pretty unruly, and my computer didn't really like it. But it's still possible, maybe if you use a smaller raster set. So if the user is satisfied, they can now go and use a really cool tool that's built into 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳. 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 has a tool called accuracy assessment. And what this does is acts somewhat like virtual ground truthing. When activated, 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 turns off the classification layer, leaving only the raster showing. And then a user could actually bring in a colleague who didn't see the classification and have them take samples of all the different objects they see on the screen. In this case, you can see that grass has been marked with orange, trees with yellow, and houses with red. Then once these are all taken, 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 then takes these samples and compares them with the rule set classification. And what it's looking for is how often did the human user and the computer rule set agree on the classification of a given object. In this case, you can see that the overall accuracy at this point was 98%, which is really high. We currently average around 94% agreement between the human user and the computer with all assessments always being over 90% agreement. We're pretty confident that our results will be accurate enough within the scope of our needs to identify landscape types for water use analysis. We finished exporting our 2015 data out of 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 this year. We have over 300,000 parcels that have been landscape classified, but we haven't got to analyze it yet. The pandemic and internal organizational restructurings kind of put this project on pause. At the end of the presentation here, we just want to make a quick nod to some limitations. First of all, we obviously recognize that you're limited by your resolution of your raster data sets. And the LiDAR data that we used had a 1.5 meter resolution, while the NAEP data has a 1 meter resolution. And for our purposes, we felt like we were at the absolute lower limit of resolution. We would prefer higher resolution if possible. And we are looking forward to future opportunities because we know that there's new LiDAR coming for the Phoenix area. And we also know that the 2019 and 2021 NAEP data sets should be sub-meter. It's said that the first law of geography is that all things are related, but near things are more related than far things. This is equally true, temporally speaking. Our data was about 9 months apart temporally. Now, this didn't affect already single homes too much. However, we did see some weird examples of what was happening in farms out in Levine. We saw these strange classifications of these long, jagged buildings in rows in all these fields. And we were trying to figure out what had happened. When what we discovered was that the LiDAR being taken in the fall of 2014 actually saw the corn rows as they were up above the ground. But the NAEP data taken in 2015 only saw fallow ground. And so therefore, it misclassified it as these jagged buildings. So you have to take into consideration what your purpose is. what you're looking for and keep the temporal separation of your data as close as possible. Obviously, aerial data takes a lot of storage space, especially raw LiDAR data, and you need to have that space available. You need to have computers that are able to run these kinds of programs and use this kind of large data sets, and you need to have skilled employees who have learned how to use such software and know what they're looking at and why they're receiving the results that they're getting. 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 comes with a high learning curve, but all of these limitations can be overcome with proper planning and with just over time. That's pretty much the end of my presentation. Thanks for staying with me to the end. Any questions?
Cool. Thank you, Darin. That was really interesting. I really wish I had your lack of free time myself, because I could do so much. So Ben Hickson threw in the chat, one, he loved the presentation, but two, that the 2017 NAEP and I think the 2019 NAEP are all going to be 0.6 meters in resolution. So
yes, that's true.
So definitely that's good. So maybe with some new LiDAR data, you could rerun the project. I think it's an impressive application. I think if someone happens to, a couple questions are all pouring in. So Shauna asked, is 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 a downloadable software or a SaaS?
It's a downloadable software through Trimble. It's mainly just remote sensing. Interestingly enough, 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 was originally meant to map the human body, but Trimble figured out a better use for it in mapping the surface of the Earth. So, but you can go to trimble.com and you'll be able to find out more about 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 there.
Cool. And Vivian had a follow-up question of, can you tell us a bit more about 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳? Did you say that the program is a process that processes the LiDAR data?
How it processes the LiDAR data?
I think she's just looking to sort of understand how 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 absorbs all these different layers to create the mapping, would be my sort of reinterpretation of her question. Okay.
The key, there's one weakness to 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 that ArcGIS has over it, is that ArcGIS can project on the fly and 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 can't. So while you're in GIS, you actually have to take all of these different data sets and you have to project them out to the exact same projection before you put them in 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳. It lays, so therefore that way it knows it's laying each of those data sets on top of each other exactly where they belong. And then it's able to read each of those cells between, kind of like we do in GIS up through it. So it's got the LiDAR pixel is underneath one of the 4-band pixels, which is inside the vector layers. And so it's not actually, you can process LiDAR inside 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳. I just found it easier to process the raw LiDAR data into an NDSM and bring the NDSM into 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 and just go from there. I could probably spend more time explaining that off camera or off mic.
Cool. Yeah, unfortunately, we need to move on to Drew's presentation, which will also be spectacular. But I think people have your contact information and could probably reach out with further questions. I know I've really enjoyed the little bit I've played with 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳. It's an incredibly powerful piece of software. So,
thanks, Mark.
Great. Thank you so much, Darin. That was amazing. So, cool. Drew, are you out there?
I am here. Thank you. I will start my video and then I'll attempt to share. There we go. And
hey, Drew. So Drew is from USGS. He is the geospatial liaison for California and I believe also Arizona. Did they finally just give us to you?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Drew Decker with U.S. Geological Survey. I am the national map liaison for Southern California and Arizona, and thanks for having me here. Great presentations earlier from Chris and Darin, so I really like them a lot, and hopefully, this will help a little bit more in determining what new LiDAR may be coming too down the road in Arizona. So I'm going to talk about the USGS 3D elevation program and 3D Nation. 3D elevation program, which is called 3DEP, is a new program we have to generate a new topo base for the country. Okay, we're going to be using mainly LiDAR over the lower 49 and territories, and 𝐻𝐺 in Alaska to generate a new topo base to replace the old one we had, which has its roots, of course, in the old topo maps. From the contour lines that we collected many years ago, they turned that into basic 30-meter and then 10-meter DEMs, which are good, but not great. And now we have something that will really improve the topo base of the country. I won't go through all the details here, but suffice it to say, we're trying to complete this in about 8 years. So that the first time coverage of the country, we hope, will be complete somewhere around 2023 or so. Okay, to do this, we had to have a study to help us get funding for the program, to help demonstrate who would use the data, how it would be used, and the benefits to be realized from it. And so this was what we call NEA, National Enhanced Elevation Assessment, back in 2012, before the program really got going. And you can see here's the number of business uses that people listed and the potential benefits that can be realized from the data. As you can expect, there are a lot of different benefits from this, and it showed quite a large potential benefit should the data be developed. And so now we're doing that, and hopefully these will be realized as the program is completed and continues on. And speaking of continues on, we have something called the 3D Nation study. Since we're midstream now with 3DEP, it behooved us to go ahead and look at, well, how people are using the data, what benefits are they getting now, and kind of assessing the program in midstream. Also seeing where can we go after this? What are we going to be doing as elevation is completed for the country the first time? Where can we go from here? So to do that, we also began to ask people about other uses related to, say, inland bathymetry, lakes and rivers, and offshore, looking at nearshore and offshore bathy collections as well. So we operated in the same way we did with NEA, in that we worked with different states, and a big thank you to Arizona for help with this. And Jenna, you and Ron at State Land, Mark, you with the Forest Service helped lead the way for this, so thank you very much, plus the other dozen or so organizations that responded to the questionnaire and helped out. So we're all done for Arizona. We have the 3D elevation, the 3D Nation group now processing the data. We should have the final report out, I'm guessing, around the end of the year, so maybe a little after that. So it'll be great to see what people say and how they're going to use the data in the future. So jumping ahead, here's the LiDAR-based specification. I won't dwell on this for very long. You can see the URL at the bottom. This kind of explains what we're collecting, the basic things we provide, the standards that we adhere to. And so this helps us be the 3D or the 3DEP spec, right? We want the LiDAR to be 3DEP spec naturally once we're done with this. Okay, there are different levels, quality levels here. What we look for is something called QL2 or better. QL2 has a minimum of 2 points per square meter. That meets our specification. It's got, of course, some vertical accuracy requirements in the DEM size. If you get the higher or denser data, QL0, QL1, you get a nice half-meter DEM in there. And of course, we can change the size of the DEMs too by the project as needed. The data we saw in for Phoenix was a QL2 from 2014. The 3DEP governance, this isn't just USGS by itself, but there are many agencies participating in this. We have a working group, so it's made up of folks from a number of different organizations, so the major federal agencies that help with this, such as the Forest Service and FEMA, and Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, they all have people who help guide this and are kept aware of what we're doing with the program. So we get a lot of feedback on the standard, on the collection priorities, and it really helps the program move forward. We also have a few non-Fed groups in there, such as NISGIC and American Association of State Geologists, as well as a few others. So what we do here is we work with partnerships, and probably most of you are aware. Sometimes we can just work directly. We, being USGS and 3DEP, can work directly with federal agencies, which is good. But a lot of the times we go through a process called the Broad Agency Announcement. That's an annual solicitation that we provide, seeking input or proposals from different interested groups or organizations in generating new LiDAR. So it's open typically year-round, and I'll have a little bit more on that in a second. You can see some of the criteria here, and it's competitive. The criteria are clear. It can include all sorts of different agencies: local, regional, universities, private sector, federal, etc. So just a little bit of background on this. Again, the partners are needed to help collect the data. We have a lot of funding for 3DEP, but not nearly enough, so that's why the partnerships come in. There are different ways people can participate in this. A lot of the time, people will work through USGS and use our contractors, but partners can go out and manage the project on their own. It doesn't happen as much, but sometimes that's what they prefer to do. This little graphic kind of shows where we are now with this. The map on the right shows the areas in light green. These are the recent partnerships that were awarded in the last year or so. Little graph on the left shows how the funding tends to increase over the last few years for the project, so that's all good. Now we're having a new BAA. They typically come out by fiscal year, and we started fiscal year 21, so we're BAA season now. It was released September 28th, as you can see there. It's open year-round, but we do have a first review of the data with proposals coming up in November. That's so we can look at who put in proposals and help make awards, especially for projects that maybe need to get underway in early 2021. You can't wait for the whole year to collect this stuff. You have to start looking at it sooner so we can have the LiDAR develop as people need it. So you can take a look here. These are some basic information on this. Look at the URL at the top. That's where you can go to get full information on the BAA. Also, note towards the bottom here in red, there's a public webinar from August 19th that has complete information on the process. Okay, so be sure to take a look at that if you're interested but have not seen that yet. And you can get to it right from the page at the top. Okay, some of the selection criteria. This is all at that link. I'm not going to go into this a whole lot. Project location, kind of a big deal here. We want to select data for the whole country, so where it's not already developed, that may have a higher priorities in other areas. There's a few other things too. We don't want the data to be too old, and other things that we look for as well. Tribal considerations, we do need to notify federally recognized Indian tribes whenever we're going to be collecting LiDAR over their area, so they have the chance to talk to us about that and see if there may be any initial concerns over the eventual public release of the data. Also, a few other criteria: aerial extent. Larger projects are generally better. As you can see, we've got a range of projects here. And you go, unless you can see the cursor, but average is around 4,800 square miles or so. But I've seen them a lot smaller, and they've been quite a bit bigger too. We have federal areas of interest that we look at, and I have a few maps here to show on that. All the maps you see here are included on the BAA link, so you can go and look at this. This shows areas of federal interest, for example. We kind of tally that up over a couple of years, the next coming years, to see where Fed agencies, which are all part of the working group, are interested in getting you data. You can see this little tally here, 1, 2, 3, 4 agencies. You can kind of get a sense for who's interested in what in Arizona. So you can see, quite a bit of interest here within the state. You can kind of refine that a little bit more, and you get kind of a high priority federal areas of interest. You can see some of those areas here in the Southwest as well, including some in Arizona. Again, all these maps are available on our site. In NSGIC, which I mentioned before, the National State Geographic Information Council is working with a number of states, including Arizona, more prominently, on developing state acquisition plans. So Arizona played a big role in getting one done early, along with several other states working with NSGIC, so that's really good. And that's what we're hoping will help carry us across the finish line to finish the national data collection by, again, around 2023. We have agreements that we work on with our partners. I will be the person who does that, so I work with different groups like Jenna and the folks who help partner for the new Maricopa, Pinal County work. So I'll do a lot of that as well. I'm also working on, one thing we need to look at here is freed-up acquisition checklist. That is a few places to start with this. Start with the inventory to see what may be out there. Okay, I'll show you a little graphic of that in a second. Coordinate and form partnerships, I help a lot with that. And we have another tool which can assist with that as well. And you can submit a BA proposal almost year-round for this, although we do have the earlier review this year. The inventory site is here on the left, and that's both for helping you plan and just to find data. You need to look for data out there. I think we have a lot of the OpenTopo data in there too, and of course, they're welcome to all our data as well. 𝐀𝐫𝐤𝐳𝐬 is a little planning site that NOAA operates, and that allows people to put their area of interest with a few basic things, the who, what, where, why, and people can contact you and see if they'd like to work on a collaborative project. Here's the map for 𝐀𝐫𝐤𝐳 for Arizona. I took the picture today. So you can see a lot of interest here. I think a lot of this is National Park Service, USDA over here. So there's a lot of groups expressing interest in different parts of Arizona. Okay. Oh, and it's hard to see, but you can see the PAG area down here as well. Accessing data, we have a lot of data available. As you'd expect, this site here will lead you to full information, not only about 3DEP, but also downloading the data and accessing it. The different products that we have, kind of a collection of seamless data, project-based stuff. There's a whole bunch here, and we have a little video series out there with a video or two about these different products that may be helpful. We keep all the source data out there, the point clouds, the DEMs, and things like that. So it's generally all available for download. And to kind of wrap up here, this is where we are there in Arizona right now. The green areas are done, I believe. And although there may be different degrees of accessibility at the moment, but we're getting there. The yellow areas, tan areas are in work now. So here's a large Maricopa Pinal project and several other major projects underway as well. So hopefully we'll have more coming in the future after the next BAA season here. And finally, a few resources. I won't read these. I think everyone has access to this and can take a look at these for reference on the data and the specs that I mentioned before. And I think that is that. So, thanks. Any questions? Oh, here's my contact info too.
Thank you so much, Drew. That was great. It's always a great recap of the 3DEP program. So and the new stuff that's coming. It is 2:30, so I think the other sessions are starting. So I'm not sure if we have time for any questions. Jenna, are you out there?
Yeah, I'm here. We actually can spend a few minutes with questions if folks have them. The next session is the sponsor breakout session. And today we only have one sponsor in there, so we don't want to overwhelm her. So I think we're okay.
Cool. Are there any questions? I'm just going to throw up the second session just so you guys can see that on your screens. But are there any questions? We're happy to throw them in the chat. Drew, it looks like you got one. Are these data open resources?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat?
I think the question was directed at you. Are these data open resources?
By open resources, if you mean the public domain, the answer would be yes.
Cool.
And Mark, I'll just say that would apply also to the data in OpenTopography, whether it's 3DEP or any of the NSF or other partner collected data. It's all open, essentially free to use for any purpose, commercial or otherwise.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, there's a ton of resources out there, and I think it's great how much this is growing in Arizona. So I think we're really starting to bring a lot of resources out there. Do other people have questions, not just for Drew, or for any of our presenters? We have a little bit of extra time. Please, if you throw the question in the chat, just include who you're directing it toward. So. Darin, are you still with us? There's a question for you that just popped in.
Yeah, I'm still here. When do we hope to analyze the data process? Oh my gosh, as soon as possible. But with our team is actually, we've been moved almost to a completely different department where we are. So I don't know when that's going to happen. We're hoping it'll be by the end of the year or sometime next year.
Cool, thank you. And also just to sort of follow up, William has a follow-up of what applications? So he sort of asked a two-part question. What would be some of the applications for it?
That's actually a really good question because Mayor Gallego actually reached out to us. They wanted to be able to use our data because she has a group that's looking to analyze the tree cover for Phoenix and how the shade program that's going on. So we actually, we're working with Dr. Handula from ASU on that. So that's not actually what we're going to be doing as a group, but our data is going to actually be going out to another group who wants to use it. So we're using it to identify water. Our group's using it to identify water use outdoors inside Phoenix, but others want to use it to identify tree canopy inside Phoenix and how it's changing and where perhaps we could increase that shade canopy.
Oh, great. And it looks like you have a potential partner, Adria Saravoy. Looks like they've done a similar landscape analysis in Scottsdale, but they did not use 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳. They would love to compare notes with you, using it also for the purpose of assessing water conservation and shade. So I think there's a lot of municipalities that are probably very interested in this kind of analysis. So
we found that Scottsdale is often right there alongside us, or maybe sometimes ahead of us, looking at these things. So I'm not surprised.
So, yeah, 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 is a really impressive piece of software. For those who haven't had a chance to play with it, it's amazing how you can sort of mash up a variety of different data sets into one and get it to produce these polygons for you. So you can throw imagery, LiDAR, or other data sets into it, and it sort of mushes them together really well and comes up with stuff. I've toyed with it a little bit of trying to use it on the U.S. Forest Service to sort of remap our vegetation by bringing in elevation as a component to combine it with our imagery. So. Any other questions out there for any of our presenters? Just to throw in my other notes too, Chris, I thought your presentation was really interesting. I think it's great how you're sort of piped in all of this 3-depth data into it, and hopefully one day we'll find a way to sort of open that up to everybody. But I think the open topo tools are perfect for unleashing all of this data that's there for USGS and opening up to the mass markets. I think it's one of the biggest stumbling blocks I've seen in LiDAR is, yes, we have LiDAR, but you happen to need ArcMap and all this training to use it. So I think it'd be great if one day that they found a way for OpenTopo to be able to serve up the whole 3-depth data set for the whole country. I think that would be fantastic. It sounds like money is the only barrier.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the original motivations for OpenTopo in 2009 still hold in the sense that a lot of people don't want to have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get to that product that they actually need for their analysis, regardless of what that is. But yeah, right now it's just that the volume of data in that bucket kind of exceeds the resourcing that we currently have. And frankly, kind of the mandate, like NSF's mandate is very much a research and education focused mandate, not a supporting state and local agencies. And so trying to navigate the sort of politics and funding around that is sort of the tricky thing, although we're making progress. And I'm hopeful that, as I said, I'm talking to NSF tomorrow. So I'm hopeful we'll approve a plan we can move forward with.
Yeah, budgets only ever seem to get smaller, never
Indeed.
larger. But at the same time, you've got $500 million of an investment there. It's in some ways pennies to allow access.
Yeah, and actually, that was a number I just.
All this money.
I'd be curious to know, Drew, do you know what the total investment in 3-depth data collection is? Like how much money has been spent to collect that 65% of the United States coverage?
I don't see Drew in the chat anymore.
Okay.
He may have dropped off on us. But yeah, and what's interesting is ever since the 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐵 got, sort of wall-to-wall LiDAR coverage, I've been trying to grab some sense of like what is the value of this. And our most recent project was looking at stock tanks on the South Zone for water right adjudication, which obviously is huge in Arizona. And we were using it to assess the volume calculations of our stock tanks. Now, why this was significant was that the way we used to do this is to send people into the field, right? We'd say, okay, you guys go in the field with some measurements and try to get some sense. And so in 20 minutes, we would do what would take a field crew possibly 4 hours to reach one of our more remote stock tanks. So a 3-person team in a vehicle for 8 hours compared to 20 minutes of my time. The cost savings of LiDAR, I think, are also just absolutely huge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we see that all the time. And I think our argument has been that there's also, time is money. And so the easier it is to get to the data in the first place. And, the number of steps you can kind of automate or remove in the data delivery process really has huge economic impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're sort of on our own at this point, folks. So if anybody would like to be unmuted to ask their question or just sort of join in the conversation, feel free to throw something in the chat and we can start unlocking some more people. It's just now turned into that sort of casual after the presentation moments. So feel free to throw something in the chat if you'd like to be unmuted and ask a specific question, or just talk about how you're using LiDAR and or some ideas you have for how you would like to use LiDAR. So we've continued to explore that on the 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐵. The stock tank was just the most recent application, but we're starting to see a lot of those kind of uses of, hey, we need to look at that road, or hey, we need to look at some other stuff like stock tanks and things. So I think we'll only continue to see the value of it grow over time. So our next big thing is to look at tree structure and post-fire work to try to understand. We're very good at understanding low, moderate, high severity, which is what I spoke about yesterday in depth, but we're now also looking at using high-resolution imagery and creating point clouds from that to determine the fire damage kind of thing. So.
Are you doing that with NAPE imagery or other imagery that's collected?
So we have, in this particular region, contracts already set up for high-resolution imagery. I'm not convinced that of the NAPE imagery that I've seen that it's good enough. So what we contract as part of the fire operations is to have the fire flown. And so we get 30-centimeter post-fire imagery. And then we have the pre-fire LiDAR. We can create the point cloud from the post-fire imagery and then try to do some sort of, and this is still in the experimental phase, but then subtract one from the other to do a biomass loss and compare that to the severity classes. That's kind of where we're hoping to go with this. Because during the Mangum fire, I brought this up to the stewardship staff officer, and I said, hey, Mike, this is going to cost us like 20 grand to buy, this imagery. And I was really worried about the cost. And he started to laugh at me. He goes, so the cost of 2 aerial drops? So the fires are, especially when they're big like the Mangum and some of these other ragers, you're dropping $4 or $5 million on that incident response. And so this is a potential pathway to acquiring more data, and high resolution imagery it's almost an afterthought. And so acquiring that, thinking forward and getting that imagery acquired during the fire means, and getting it paid for during the fire means you'll have that imagery afterwards. And I think it's a big step forward in the response after the fire, which is often forgot about, and finding money for those operations is much harder. But I'm interested to see how far I can push 30-centimeter resolution imagery, so in point cloud creation. So.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Certainly the multi-temporal component of being able to compare that to the LiDAR is super interesting. And the cost argument is super interesting too. Like there's a fire right now burning up above Boulder, and on Sunday they spent apparently $1 million on retardant drops in one afternoon. So.
Yeah, it does not take long. And to be fair, my supervisor, we had quotes on 2 things: post QL1 LiDAR data and post 30-centimeter resolution imagery. And, it was about 70 grand versus 20 grand. And he was like, if you want the 70 grand LiDAR, we'll push for it, but you better be able to prove it to me. So I backed off and went with the imagery because I think it will get us, especially since, the fire will have destroyed out a lot of vegetation. I'm interested to see that as a more low-cost solution. Or if in the future, if this doesn't get us where we want to, I then have the evidence to say, no, we need post-fire LiDAR to properly assess the impact kind of thing. So, but I hope maybe next year to be able to present some of that at AGIC, because the great work that the UAS group here is doing has cued me into not just what drones can do, but what the software can do now with drone imagery. And yes, drone imagery is better. You're obviously talking maybe down at like 1 or 2 centimeters, but 30 centimeters run through the same software, I'm hoping will still produce some really high quality data sets. So.
Yeah, interesting. And those fires are probably large enough that UAS is probably not, you really need to be in a fixed wing or rotor aircraft, not a drone to cover them fully, right?
Yeah, well, yes and no. The Forest Service is actually spinning up a UAS division kind of as we speak. They've actually started hiring people, and they're going to try to start servicing more of the fires with drones. And I think drone technology is only going to expand. But yeah, there is a threshold limit to how far a drone can go and what it can tell you, especially in a fire situation. And so where that line exists of fire operations versus post-fire operations may determine how that goes. But we are spinning up a fire drone program and a natural resource grown program. So 10 years from now, I'm not sure what the landscape will look like. We may be able to do that. But the Magnum fire was 71,000 acres. So I don't know if a drone will ever cover that. We need one of our drone people to really talk to the future of drones. I don't know if we happen to have one still hanging out with us here, but maybe they could speak more to the world of drones and planes and where the future holds. So. But that's definitely been the big hindrance I've seen with drones is how long can you keep them in the air. But I think the imagery component is really has some great potential, at least from a funding standpoint, So.
Yeah, and sorry, how much did you say the imagery collection was for that specific fire? Versus, because you said $70K for the LiDAR, but what was the imagery cost?
About 20 grand.
Yeah.
So, and so, yeah, to the fire, that's nothing. It was one phone call. I called my boss called the forest supervisor called the fire, said, yeah, give Mark whatever he wants. And I had a call the next day from the flight ops chief saying, all right, what do you want? And we had an order cut to the regional office. There was a variety of paperwork that had to happen after that, but from the fire's perspective, spending 20 grand on imagery was nothing when you're burning $4 or $5 million on it's a drop in the bucket. And it's not that the retardant isn't useful, but that imagery will have a lifespan. Because when we look at these mega fires, we're looking at 5 to 10 years out of work that we're going to have to do to restore that landscape. So especially when you're hitting high severity. And so that imagery collected right after will have a life for 10 years. The dollar investment you will get back 100 times more in its use. So.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on the Mark and Chris show here? Or
yeah.
We're talking about their uses of LiDAR. I'm happy to turn on people's mics. So I see a number of LiDAR providers out there if you want to jump in and say hi. Oh. Okay, cool. Well,
hey, Mark.
Thank you so much for every. Hello.
Oh, hey, I was just going to say, around the conversation discussion about utilizing UAS, there is certainly that threshold. And, another thing to consider too for us remote sensing contractors that we look at is, the number of exposures when acquiring imagery, whether it be a UAS platform or from a fixed wing, the cameras we use are, really set for collecting those efficiently with larger exposure footprints. So, it's less processing time on the back end, less room for error when you're talking about, image dodging and corrections and things of that nature. So I'm really interested to hear, hopefully your presentation next year about, the $20,000 imagery versus, going the LiDAR route or, perhaps the simultaneous collection of imagery and LiDAR. Many of us contractors have those assets as well. So it's very cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm hoping to get set up in the regional office. I know Candace has been working toward it, and this is sort of our first attempt. And it was definitely there were a lot of stumbling blocks. Contracting had never seen a order like this from a fire. They didn't know what to make of it. And so it took a while to get them to understand what we were asking for and get those specs set up. But I'd like to get to a point where it's like a one form checkbox. I want imagery, LiDAR, near infrared, stereo, scope, and get that pushed out, so that after fires, this kind of data can be quickly and easily collected with a purchase order from the fire. So. Cool. All right, folks, it's 2:50. I'll give you some time. I think we're having a game at 3 o'clock. Once again, please join us again at 3:30. We've got some amazing presentations set up from NAU, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much, everybody.